Andrew was my smart as a whip, wasn't a computer or video game that he could not conquer.
What about Alex?
He was very inquisitive. If he could take it apart and put it back together, he was happy. Tanner was my baby. He had been 5 for 1 month when they went missing.
On November 26th, I was at home. I received a call in the evening from Officer Hillard. He explained that the whereabouts of John and Tanya's children, Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner, 9, 7, and 5, were unknown at this point, and he was concerned about their safety. We found a Facebook post from November 24th where he states, and I quote, "I love my wife very much. May God and Tanya forgive me."
Any doubt in your mind what he was saying?
I have no doubt in my mind.
What was he saying?
Tanya, I killed the boys.
And are you confident that they were killed on or about November 26th?
I am.
I have no doubt in my mind that John Skelton killed Andrew, Tanner, and Alexander Skelton.
All right, Mr. Skelton, you have the opportunity but not the obligation to participate in today's hearings.
Yeah, I couldn't go. I mean, everyone else got lawyers, I don't. I'm at a disadvantage. Anything I say is going to make a difference right now.
And then it was like one day this switch flipped and just became somebody that none of us recognized.
Alexander William Skelton, Andrew Ryan Skelton, and Tanner Lucas Skelton are presumed to be deceased as of November 26, 2015. Presentation of evidence, however, does not present clear and convincing evidence that John Skelton murdered these children.
Thanks for joining us here on another episode of Case Files here with 11 Investigates. I'm Melissa Andrews, along with lead investigator Brian Duggar. Well, last week we went over the Skelton case, the case of the boys missing in Morenci for nearly 15 years, Alexander, Andrew, and Tanner Skelton. Their father is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence for unlawful imprisonment. He was never charged with murder. We'll talk about why we believe that could happen before he gets out of prison. But this week was a big trial up in Lenawee County in probate court. Basically, the boys' mother, Tanya Zuvers, petitioned to have the boys declared dead. And as part of that, the judge was asked to consider that John Skelton murdered his son. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. First of all, I want to recap what happened in that trial this week in Lenawee County Probate Court.
Yeah, I couldn't go. I mean, everyone else got lawyers, I don't. I'm at a disadvantage. Anything I say is going to make a difference right now.
The last person to see the boys alive, their father, John Skelton, refused to participate in the hearing to declare them dead.
He didn't even bother to show up today. He doesn't want any part of anything to do with these children because he murdered them.
Please raise your right hand, sir.
4 witnesses, including the former Morenci police chief, a Michigan State Police detective, an FBI agent, and an expert in proof of life, all testified they're 100% certain Alexander, Andrew, and Tanner Skelton were murdered by John on or around November 26, 2010.
No doubt in my mind.
Each member of law enforcement went through the stories Skelton told them about where the boys were and who had them, all leading to dead ends. They said John destroyed the family's home and wanted Tanya to have nothing. He spelled that out in a suicide letter.
It was addressed, "Dear Tanya, love John." Certain parts of the note that we learned from the investigation read, "You need to be strong now. Sorry I hurt you yet again. This time it was on purpose and to kill my pain of losing you. I had no one here." It continues, "I guess my actions today will guarantee you won't have to see me again or in heaven. I pray God will forgive me, but I know it won't happen. May you find peace in the days to come. You will hate me forever, and I know this."
What was he saying?
"Tanya, I killed the boys."
Then other lies leading police on wild goose chases.
He is I believe, is it 95% sure that the boys were in a dumpster near Holiday City, Ohio. He urges the interviewers to respond and get his boys.
He had no excitement, no elation that we found this person who he initially told me would help us find the boys. He looked scared to death.
Evidence on his computer showed the woman he claimed to give the boys to was created by him. And he also searched poisons and other ways to kill.
He'd conducted a search on the 20th of November, how to break a neck.
So there was proof of life before November 26, 2010.
Correct.
And there's been no proof of life since November 26, 2010.
Correct.
Their mother said it's time to give her sons a death certificate, a date of death, and give them the respect of saying what truly happened.
Their dad showed them no respect. And I shouldn't even say their dad. John Skelton showed them no respect. Because any loving father would not have done what he did. And I owe them the respect that we may not have their bodies, but they're still, their lives still meant something, and there is a place to go.
So that was what happened pretty much in this case. The judge ended up granting, she said, the petition in part. So she did declare the boys dead. She was very emotional. A lot of us reporters in the room, first of all, thought the way that she was speaking was that maybe it wasn't going to go this way, that maybe she wasn't going to declare them dead. She ended up doing that, but she said there was not enough evidence, at least presented in these hearings, and she acknowledged it's not a criminal trial. She said there wasn't enough evidence presented by the petitioner, Tanya Zuvers, and her attorney to say that John Skelton killed his sons.
And that was really interesting to me because listening to it, it seemed like there was a lot of evidence. This was supposed to be a 3-day trial, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And they wrapped it up in 1 day?
Yeah, there were 5 witnesses, 4 investigators, and Tanya Zuvers. So it was planned for 3 days and only ended up taking 1, at least with the testimony. And then the judge basically said, give me Tuesday. You guys are all planning to be here Wednesday anyway. Give me Tuesday to look at everything, and I'll give you my decision Wednesday morning. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the one thing that's really important is that John Skelton is actually scheduled to get out of prison in November. So obviously nobody that's involved in this case, I'm guessing they don't want him to get out of prison. Mm-hmm. So it's important to have this done now so they could probably move ahead with the next stage.
Tanya said it was mainly for closure. She wanted to acknowledge to her kids and give them the respect that I know what happened to you. I know you're not coming home. I know you're not with some group. She wanted a date of death given to her boys. She wanted a birth certificate, or death certificate rather, for her boys. And I don't know that anyone really expected John Skelton to show up to a death hearing for his children, considering he has the chance of getting out in November. He is set to get out in November unless they file these murder charges. But I was pretty disappointed with the way that he appeared in court for just a few seconds. So take a look at what he said.
They told me I had to refuse here, and that's it. There we go.
Very good. Okay, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Skelton, you have the opportunity but not the obligation to participate in today's hearings. But I did want to make sure that you had that opportunity. So you're welcome to tell me for the record now if you'd like to stay or go.
Yeah, I want to go. I mean, everyone else got lawyers. I don't. I'm at a disadvantage. Anything I say isn't going to make a difference right now.
Yeah, and we were talking about that earlier. I mean, it's really interesting. He says nothing that I'm going to say is actually going to make a difference. But in fact, he's the one person who knows exactly what happened to these boys, whether A, he either killed them, or B, whether he did turn them over to someone as he's claimed multiple times.
I honestly thought it was disgusting, to just throw your hand up like this and say, I was just told that I had to be here to say that I'm not going to do this. Tanya wouldn't even look at him. He was on a screen, a screen behind her. She didn't look at him, but I think it was just very cold way to enter into any kind of hearing involving the death of your children.
He seemed bothered that he had to be there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there you have that. That's the way it kind of all started off. We did a story for the 10-year anniversary of the boy's disappearance. That would be about almost 5 years now. And Larry Weeks was the former Morenci police chief that I interviewed. So he was the police chief when the boys disappeared on November 6, 2010, and he was the first witness to take the stand this week.
Yeah, and it was very compelling. I mean, I think we probably have a clip here, but when he was actually called to the scene, John Skelton was in very physical discomfort. I mean, he had broken his ankle, right?
Yeah, he was already acting erratically. And, the police chief said that he had experience with this family a little bit. One of the kids had just called 911 a few days before this, reporting that John was missing. And that was one of the things that was brought up to kind of show that these kids know how to call 911. They knew what was going on to a certain extent.
Yeah, when you talk about them calling 911 on their dad, I think at some point, kind of what I was getting out of this, John Skelton maybe at one point seemed to be a good dad, working with the kid, doing stuff with a treehouse with them. And then at some point, his behavior really started to change, and he started acting pretty irrationally. And so I kind of wonder what that whole trigger was for him.
Well, Tanya said that it was that he wanted to take the kids and move to Florida. So he actually went to the school and said, I'm taking my kids and we're going to Florida. And so the school called Tanya. She immediately went down there and stopped him from going to Florida, brought him back to the house, and then he really did take off to Florida with 2 of the boys. And then she had to file for divorce, she said, in this trial, file for divorce and custody to be able to enforce a custody order in Florida to bring the boys back. But going back to what Larry Weeks said, so now we're after, when he tried to take the kids to Florida, which ignited all the trouble in the family, according to Tanya, that was September, October. And now we're on November 26th, which is when John Skelton was supposed to return the boys to their mother. This is the former Morenci police chief testifying about how he got involved in the case.
On November 26th, I was at home. I received a call in the evening from Officer Hillard. He indicated he was at the Fulton County Medical Center near Waseon, Ohio. He explained to me over the phone that he had what I would describe as a disturbing situation. I explained that John was there with an ankle injury and was acting extremely erratic. He was having a difficult time getting specific information out of him as far as what had transpired and led him to this point at the hospital. He explained that the whereabouts of John and Tanya's children, Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner, 9, 7, and 5, were unknown at this point, and he was concerned about their safety.
Did he bring up the name Joanne too?
He went on to explain that the best he could get from John was that they were with a woman by the name of Joanne Taylor, and Joanne's husband his name was Mark, and he was a pastor.
Did Mr. Skelton say anything about suicide or trying to kill himself?
Yes, and that and it was implied that's how he injured his ankle, and it was his intention to harm himself. Ultimately, secured a ride from a family member after the failed attempt to the hospital.
It's fair to say he failed to kill himself. You're understanding.
That's what he described.
So this is the first time we hear the mention of Joanne Taylor, and there are a couple people that John brought up throughout the course of this investigation, but what else do we know about Joanne Taylor?
Well, so basically, the day that this all came out, November 26th, the day the boys went missing, the day he was supposed to return them to Tanya, his aunt comes forward and says, hey, he brought a couple of suitcases over to my house and said, you know, I need to make sure to take care of this. In the suitcases were the boys' 3 winter coats. Again, this is November 26th, and their toothbrushes. So if you're giving a woman your boys, why are you not giving them their belongings? And then a laptop. And on this laptop, the police found that John created Joanne Taylor on the same IP address that was connected to his house, and that days before, which I think shows premeditation, was communicating with Tanya under the name Joanne Taylor in a Cafe Moms chat room. So in the 2010s, it was really popular for moms to blog and things like that and talk to each other under different, you know, your name, you'd ask advice about things related to kids. And so he had been reaching out to Tanya as Joanne Taylor, but he tells everybody that Joanne Taylor, he gave the boys to her for safekeeping from Tanya.
And just to be clear, there is no Joanne Taylor.
No Joanne Taylor. She does not exist. The police tracked down all of the people throughout all this, all of the leads that he sent on multiple wild goose chases, and there is no Joanne Taylor. He even messaged Tanya under the name Joanne Taylor to say, I've got your boys, so you cannot harm them anymore. So it was very cruel, and that's what I learned too. And nobody knows what was going on behind closed doors, but the way that he was said to have just wanted taken everything from Tanya, the way he destroyed the house, the noose that you talked about, the investigators didn't believe that John ever intended on taking his own life. They said this was, if you want to call it a noose, it was more like a cord, a string or something like that one would never use to do something like that. He had a Bible out and had highlighted a specific verse. He had attached roses to the wall that said, this is the first rose I gave you, this is the last. He knifed their marital mattress.
So was he trying to generate sympathy, do you think? I mean, it was with this whole suicide ploy, because I know he wrote a pretty extensive suicide note.
I just think he was out of his mind. I mean, I think parts of it you would say, yes, he's clearly trying to win her back somehow, but no one's gonna win anybody back doing the behaviors that he did. There was a suicide note left. We're going to the suicide note here, Josh, our producer. There was a suicide note left in the home. It was 3 pages, and here we're learning in the way that he's saying things why investigators think at this time, November 26th, that these boys are not alive.
There's a spiral notebook with a 3-page handwritten suicide note. It was addressed, Dear Tanya, love John. Certain parts of the note that we learned from the investigation read, you need to be strong now. Sorry I hurt you yet again. This time it was on purpose and to kill my pain of losing you. I had no one here. It continues, I guess my actions today will guarantee you won't have to see me again or in heaven. I pray God will forgive me, but I know it won't happen. May you find peace in the days to come. You will hate me forever, and I know this.
So this suicide note that you read, was written to Tanya.
Yes.
And I just want to go back through some of the things you just said. It stated that John was sorry, that he states, I'm sorry to hurt you yet again. This time it was on purpose. Is that right?
Yes.
And he goes on to say, I guess my actions today will guarantee you won't have to see me again or in heaven. Is that correct?
Yes.
What do you take from all of that?
I think that was his passive admission,
Admission of what?
killing children.
And that part of that is he knows that Tanya can never forgive him for what he did.
Correct.
Last thing on that, you will hate me forever, and I know this. Is that right?
That's correct.
And any doubt in your mind what he was saying?
I have no doubt in my mind,
What was he saying?
Tanya, I killed the boys.
So the FBI agent, it pretty clearly seemed like he believes that this was a confession by John Skelton.
And I think you also have to take into account the other pieces of circumstantial evidence that investigators are discovering at this time, like searches for poison, searches on the computer for how to break a neck, brainstem, spinal cord. So they're all piecing that together. And that's what's interesting is there is a lack of physical evidence that the boys are dead. But when you put together a writing like that and you put together the searches on the computer, what are you left to believe?
Right. I mean, I think clearly looking at that when you say, you know, I'm sure God won't forgive me, maybe you won't forgive me. You know, obviously in churches, if you commit suicide, in some churches, it's like, well, you won't be able to go to heaven because of that. But I think in this case, it doesn't sound like he's talking about the suicide. It sounds like he's talking about something
Or
else.
even he'll probably argue, if he is charged with murder, that he was talking about giving the boys away. Tanya, you'll never forgive me for giving the boys away. You'll hate me for that. So I'm sure that's the defense he'll use. There was also a conversation that I thought was really fascinating. Apparently, John and Tanya had been seeing a pastor, or they had a friend that was a pastor, and she tried to be a go-between during this time to try to at least get information as to where the boys were. So she's asking John, where are the boys? And the FBI agent here is going to describe the conversation between John and their pastor friend.
He was pretty upset and told Pastor Galloway that I miss them so much. And Pastor Galloway asked, where are they? He said, they're home. They're at home. She pressed, and that she spoke to John Skelton again and said he told her on the 27th that nobody believes me. They think I made up Joanne, that she's in my head. Seeking for clarification when Joanne picked the boys up, Galloway asked, so the boys didn't go with Joanne in the morning, Friday. Skelton told her that the boys went with Joanne Thursday night.
So that would have been Thanksgiving night.
Yes. Galloway asked directly where he took the boys, and he replied, home. I sent them home. Don't you understand? I sent them home.
What does that statement mean to you?
That he sent them to heaven.
And he explained, and I think what you alluded to as well, I mean, if you're having a conversation with a pastor and the idea is that when we die, we go to heaven, and that's described as home, then John is saying to the pastor, a religious leader, that he killed them and they are at home in heaven.
It seemed pretty clear to me. Just looking at the timeline of this, he said he gave the boys to Joanne on Thursday night, but then he sent them home. What does that mean? That seems to be saying two different things.
Exactly, and I think that's the problem is his timeline starts to get messed up. And we've talked about this. When people lie, they have an overall idea of how they're going to tell the story, but when investigators start asking about the minutia, the little details, that's where they get tripped up. Now, a neighbor did say that he last saw the boys around 2:30 in the afternoon on Thanksgiving. So it's believed that any time between, and he had been on the computer, John, later that afternoon, it's believed that any time between the last time they were seen, he also had a call and someone heard the boys in the background that afternoon as well. So between then and, then they had his phone going to Holiday City around 5 o'clock the next morning, gone for about an hour and a half. They believe that's when he discarded the boys.
Yeah, interestingly, Holiday City's in Williams County, I believe, or certainly close to Williams County. And interestingly, this week, somebody actually reached out to me and said that they would do trapping in the swamps of Williams County. And he said the word down there was that the boys were left in a tree stump.
I've heard that rumor in the past. Now, the investigators, particularly Michigan State Police, testified during this, again, one-day non-criminal trial that they have followed up on leads from everywhere. They have searched a campground, they had searched ponds, they had done exhaustive searches on foot. They follow up leads. There was a case in 2018 where the bones of 3 children were found out west, and they did DNA testing on that, and it was determined they were ancient bones, which just means over 100 years old, so that couldn't be the boys. They said we've even talked to psychics and mediums. So I believe if some tip came out, check over here, they would have done that. It's hard. These cases become so big, some of them, like this one is,
Right.
that people will say, well, I told them to go look here. And the investigators are never going to go back to the person and ring them up and say, hey, we checked here. One of the wild goose chases that's made news, and I know that he's been interviewed before by other media, maybe Detroit, something like that, is Moses Gingrich. And I just want to give you a little background before we get to the testimony on Moses Gingrich. Moses Gingrich was a man who had decided, he was Amish, he decided to leave the Amish way of life with his wife. So he was on a reality show. And their goal of the reality show was to help other Amish leave the lifestyle. So at one point, one of the wild goose chases was that John told investigators, well, I was told by the group that if I ever wanted to get the boys back, I could just call Moses. Mose, they called him. So I thought it was an amazing play on the Michigan State Police part. They just called up Mose Gingrich and told him, hey, this guy is saying that you have something to do with his kids being missing. Can you just come to talk to him? Call him on his bluff.
Right. And he did.
And he did.
He actually showed up.
He did. So here's what Michigan State Police Detective Jeremy Brewer had to say about actually bringing Moses Gingrich to the prison to meet with John Skelton.
And that led us to asking him if he'd be willing to come to Michigan and to do an interview with us and to possibly even get in front of John and to help us find these boys. Moses was 100% on board. He wanted to, number one, help us if there was something to do to help 3 missing children, but to also find out why this person in Michigan in prison for parental kidnapping and child endangerment would be mentioning his name. And so literally within just a few short months of John mentioning Moses to me, we had flown Moses to Michigan and conducted an interview with him, and then it went from there.
Okay, what happened next?
So next, Moses again agreed to meet with John. We cleared this with Michigan Department of Corrections. They said, absolutely, do what you need to do. And so I went back, and John was kind of confused because usually, every few months he'd get used to me showing up, and this was probably off timing just a little bit. And so I spoke with John, and I said, hey, we've got some, really, really good news. I said that, we were able to track down Moses Gingrich. And his response, it just appeared 100% fake initially. He was like, well, did he find the boys? And it's not the kind of response that, yeah, if we just found your boys, you probably would be a little bit more excited or have a little bit more of a reaction than some fake rehearsed response. I said, no, we haven't found the boys, but he actually, agreed to talk to you, and we have him here today, and that's when I brought Moses in to the room. John's reaction to this was a little bit just unbelievable to me. He became white as a ghost. He couldn't formulate a sentence. He started visibly shaking, almost to the point I thought he might have a medical response.
So, that's just a fascinating story there, and it certainly didn't sound like he was expecting them to bring Mose to the prison. And I think when we had talked about this was a show that he was able to watch in prison, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, they found out that he may have been able to access that Amish reality show in prison, and that's how he came up with Moses Gingrich. I'm sure more to come on that if there is a criminal murder trial. Detective Brewer was great. I've interviewed him in the past. He came into the case after Police Chief Larry Weeks left, and the case was turned over to the Michigan State Police. And once a case becomes pretty large, sometimes it does get switched over from, the local police department to the Michigan State Police. And he had met with John many, many, many times and really tried the good cop route with him. And I think, he had also talked about how anytime John would talk to you about the weather, he'd talk to you about literally anything, but the moment you brought up the boys, he would completely shut it down. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and not only the Michigan State Police, but as we saw there, the FBI was also involved. And I think Chief Weeks at one point had said, look, this case is getting much too big for Morency. We don't have the resources. So many others were involved.
Think about how frustrating it is to try to build a relationship with someone like that over years and years and years and have evidence all pointing you in one direction and just the goose chases, again, that they keep sending you on, that it's not true.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Nope. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I was just going to move on to Tanya Zubers because she's the one that started all of this. She wanted to have this death declaration. And one of the things that I think is interesting is I think the attorneys decided to wait specifically until the boys were of adult age to show that if they wanted to come back home, if they could come back home, they would come back home because they're now adults.
Yeah, and at one point, John actually said, look, when they turn 18, they will come out of hiding.
And that has not happened because they would be 19, 21, and 23. Right. So Tanya talked a little bit about her boys and why she knows that her boys aren't alive.
Andrew was my smart as a whip, wasn't a computer or video game that he could not conquer. I want to say he was probably around 4 or 5 and he was playing a video game and the girls had friends over and he did something on this video game. One of the friends said, whoa, wait a minute, I've been playing this game forever. I didn't know it did that. Show me how you did that. So here's this little 4-year-old showing this teenager how to play this video game. And so he was
Smart.
very smart. They all 3 were very smart.
And we're not here to determine who's the smartest. But
No.
I want a little bit of a description of each of the children.
Sure.
What about Alex?
He was very inquisitive. If he could take it apart and put it back together, he was happy. He loved to be friends with his sister's friends. They were his girlfriends, he liked to call them. He was going to be my ladies' man, I do believe. But fascinated with cell phones. Like we always joke that someday he would be a cell phone programmer or builder or something like that because he was so into how does it work and that, he just thought that was neat.
Yes. About Tanner.
Tanner was my baby. He had been 5 for 1 month when they went missing. Had just started in big school, was so excited to be in big school like his brothers. He was still had that little babiness to him. But he could tell stories and he could tell them and you would believe him because he would tell stories that were almost believable and you're kind of going, I don't know, and then he would go, I'm just messing with you. And you're going, how do you do this, But Yeah.
It's safe to
But-
say they were all pretty sharp children.
Yeah, they were. And they were each other's best friends. They were, this stuff that very rarely did they fight. They were, but they were only like a year and 11 months apart, each of them. And so they're built-in best friends.
So when I'm listening to her testify, she's talking about how smart these boys are, how they're each other's best friends, how they can figure out anything. So, and I think that kind of tells me they really are dead, because if they were hid away somewhere as they're growing up, these smart kids, they're gonna figure a way to get out of there and get back to mom.
Yeah, and we heard that one of them called 911 just days before this all happened because he couldn't find his dad. And she truly believes that had they been next to any stranger out somewhere in the country, they would have said, "This isn't my mom, this isn't my dad." I thought listening to that was really hard. You're a parent. I have a 9-year-old now. Our producer on this show has a 5-year-old. You know how kids are developed at those ages. And when she said that Tanner was still her baby, just going into kindergarten, that just rips your heart out. And I have to say, I feel strongly about this. Like if I could solve this case, if I could find these boys, I want nothing more than for these 3 boys to be found, honestly. I mean, I just think it's just such a cruel thing to go through and to live your life not knowing where your children are.
Yeah, I think that's one of the questions people always ask me as an investigative reporter. How do you deal with stuff like this? We deal with a lot of cold cases and murders and kids being hurt, and it's difficult because, like you said, we're both parents, and it is difficult to deal with stories like this, but these are stories that also demand answers. That's what we're trying to do.
I thought it was really interesting too, and I've never been involved in a probate case like this, but Tanya had her attorney, she's the petitioner, and then the boys had their own attorney. And she would ask questions, but it was not a defense prosecution adversarial type situation. And so this is another advocate for the boys who is basically there to act in their best interest. So she's not wanting the boys to be declared dead or not wanting them to be declared dead. She is just really there representing the interests of the boys. And I really thought her closing statement was very heartfelt as well. And she is basically have to give her recommendation to the judge on what she thinks should happen for the boys.
All right.
So let's listen to that.
I've been sitting there on behalf of Andrew Alexander and Tanner Skelton, who could not be here today with us because they are deceased. This is not a typical case. It's both a unique and chilling experience as an attorney to have 3 clients that I've never had the opportunity to meet or speak with and will never have that opportunity. Based on the overwhelming amount of evidence that has been presented in this matter, and on behalf of my clients, Andrew Alexander and Tanner Skelton, I am joining the petitioner's request to have these 3 boys declared deceased, and a finding that they have been deceased since on or about November 26th of 2010. Although I never got to meet any of my clients, I know that if they had been given to some unknown group or person, like John Skelton alleged over the years that the children had been given to, or were anywhere out there at any point after November 26th of 2010, at some point those boys would have found a way to make contact with someone to let them know that they were scared and that they weren't where they were supposed to be. How do I know this? I know this because on November 21st, 2010, just 5 days before the boys would never be heard from or seen again, 7-year-old Alexander Skelton made that phone call that you heard testimony about today to the police while he was at his father's home because he was scared when he couldn't find his father, John Skelton.
She has hoped and prayed that her children would return alive and safe. You just heard her testify that she had to come to grips with the fact that that's not going to happen. She knows that they're dead. She knows that they died on or about November 26, 2010. She has prayed this whole time that her heart would heal and someone would provide information on their whereabouts, even though she knew they weren't alive. She's hoped beyond all hope that the last person to see them alive, John Skelton, would offer any plausible explanation. He didn't even bother to show up today. He doesn't want any part of anything to do with these children because he murdered them. And he murdered them on or about November 26, 2010. It's time that we declare these children dead.
Now, I actually had not seen that testimony previously, and she thought the same thing we were just discussing there, that these boys probably would have found a way out. So what we know at this point is that the judge did declare them dead, and the date she gave was actually 2015, but they disappeared in 2010, which if they were killed, they likely would have been killed in 2010. So why 2015?
Well, Michigan has a statute that says if someone is missing and there is no proof of life after 5 years or any evidence or explanation as to them being alive somewhere, then they can be presumed dead. So that's why the date of death is 5 years to the day after they disappeared. So it's interesting because Burke Castleberry said that in his opening statement that he cited the 5-year statute. So basically the judge said, I find that they're deceased based on this statute alone and not the evidence that you presented here in this trial.
Okay,
Which pained her. She was very emotional in saying that.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So then now the big question we have to answer, what happened next? I know the judge, when she kind of wrapped all this up, I thought she had said something like, it just seems like there's a lot of hearsay that John Skelton actually killed these boys. I haven't seen any concrete evidence that he actually did that. So we're thinking at this point there might be murder charges, and then, yeah, I'm not exactly following the hearsay evidence, but to me it sounds like there's pretty clear evidence.
Well, she cited hearsay because, you know, we're not in a criminal trial and certain hearsay rules can apply. So when the investigators were testifying to some things, for example, one that I can think of is when John talked to his pastor. The investigator is saying the pastor said John said this. So in a criminal trial that wouldn't fly because you have a right to confront your accuser, meaning the pastor would go on the stand and not the investigator talking about the pastor. So she felt like there were secondhand, third-hand, even fourth-hand stories that could not be cooperated. Whether or not her attorney, Tanya's attorney, felt like it needed to go to that level to get this death declaration on that date, we don't know. Obviously, he probably didn't.
Right, and just to be clear, like you said, this was a hearing on finding the boy dead. This was not a criminal trial. A criminal trial, if there is one, is going to look much different. Like you said, they would probably bring in the pastor, and he will say, John told me this. And I think we actually have the clip from the judge's ruling.
Alexander William Skelton, Andrew Ryan Skelton, and Tanner Lucas Skelton are presumed to be deceased as of November 26, 2015. Presentation of evidence, however, does not present clear and convincing evidence that John Skelton murdered these children.
Okay.
She was much more emotional than that particular clip showed, but she said basically the court is a member of this community too. It's not lost on the court, meaning herself, the heaviness of this, but I must follow the law. And like you said, she referenced speculation.
Right, right. So you were there amongst people that would be involved in a criminal case and who have been involved in this case for a long time. What's your impression as far as, are we going to see murder charges? How soon could we see those?
I definitely think we're going to see murder charges. A couple of the investigators who testified in this trial, I interviewed them previously, and I even asked her attorney, are you guys presenting most of what you would present at a murder trial? And he said not even close. And a couple of these investigators, as I have said, have told me that they have been gathering evidence this entire time. There was no reason to charge him with murder, let's say 5 years ago out of the blue, when they knew he was already going to be staying in prison until November of 2025 on these unlawful imprisonment charges. So why, show your cards before you have to? Because you only get one swing at the bat on a murder charge.
Yeah, and if they've been working on this since the kid disappeared, we're talking 15 years now that they've been putting a case together.
So I do believe, he expects to get out in November on these unlawful imprisonment charges. I believe that murder charges will be filed between now and then. Don't know when, but between now and then.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of 11 Investigates Case Files. You can watch all of our Skelton coverage on WTOL 11+. That, of course, if you're watching right now, is a free download, but tell your friends. We'll see you back here next time.